This is from Song of Songs in Solomon, or by Solomon. The voice of my beloved, look, he comes, leaping upon the mountains, bounding up over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing in at the windows, looking through the lattice. My beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away.
Well, beloved, on this day we have a different scripture than we would often have. It is from the Song of Solomon, also known as the Song of Songs. And actually, it's only once every, as we follow the lectionary cycle of text, it's only about once every 3 years that we get a reading from this very important and challenging work. The voice of my beloved, look, he comes leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing in at the windows, looking through the lattice. And my beloved speaks to me and says to me, arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. For now the winter is past, the rain is over and gone. The flowers appear on the earth, the time of singing has come, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The fig tree puts forth its figs, and the vines are in blossom. They give forth fragrance. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. The Song of Songs is one of the most lyrically beautiful books of the Bible. And it is a celebration of love. And specifically, the deep love between two people who have a desire for one another, an erotic love, a sensuality, a shared sensuality. The Song of Songs is the love song of two young people who are passionate about each other, who sing of their mutual longing, and who extol the beauty and the physicality of their beloved. The Song of Songs is a poetic work, an inspired poetic work that is akin to Romeo and Juliet in the garden scene. When Romeo says, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon. The brightness of her cheek would shame the stars as daylight does a lamp. Her eyes are in heaven, with through the airy region streams so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand. Oh, that I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek. That is Shakespeare. Or, if we become more contemporary, Beyonce had a song that said, you got me looking so crazy right now. Your love's got me looking so crazy right now. You got me looking so crazy right now. You got me hoping you'll page me right now. Your kiss got me hoping you'll save me right now. Looking so crazy in love. Got me looking so crazy in love. And so I'd like to share with you a few select passages from the Song of Solomon. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him that I am faint with love. How handsome you are, my beloved. Oh, how charming. And our bed is verdant. And your mouth is like the best wine. May the wine go straight to my beloved, flowing gently over lips and teeth. Let us go early to the vineyards to see if the vines have budded, if their blossoms have opened, and if the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. Isn't that beautiful? Again, it is a really powerful poem of love. And it never mentions God. There are only two books in the Bible that never directly mention God. One is the book of Esther, and the other is the Song of Solomon. Now, is God in this? Yes. But it does not speak of God. It is about two human beings and their deep love for one another. And yet, it is still part of the Hebrew canon. And yet, the ancient rabbis, scribes, and teachers of Israel looked at this text and said, this belongs in our sacred canon. And unlike the heavy patriarchy that we do experience in much of the Bible, where women are often silent and everything, where arranged marriages were the way of life, and they were based on things other than romantic love, commitment, family, joining families together, bearing children and raising them. But having a romantic connection was not one of the things that was necessary within the context of an ancient marriage. There were other things that took the place of it. And of course, the hope and the prayer is that over time, the married couple would develop a genuine love and affection for one another. But love and affection were not the beginning basis for marriage in ancient Israel. And unlike the mostly silent, subordinate role of women in these biblical texts, in the Song of Songs, both the woman and the man are vocal in their desire and are proactive in seeking out each other. He is watching her from afar. Today we might call that stalking, but that's not what it meant in this. It meant that as she was in the inner courtyards of her home and he was outside, he was always looking at a glimpse of her. And that's what reminds me so much of the garden passage from Romeo and Juliet, because isn't that what Romeo did? He snuck into the garden just to gaze on her face from afar. In this one, they are both seeking each other out. He is watching her, and she even goes out into the streets looking for him, something that it was not necessarily acceptable for a young woman to do at that time. No, their love is strong, and they are unabashed and not ashamed of that love. Hebrew Bible scholar Will Gaffney, who happens to be a personal favorite of mine, wrote this about the song. It's called the Song of Solomon or the Song of Songs. I call it the Song of Songs. Will Gaffney writes, in the song, the woman and the man are in harmony with one another and with the natural world. The brokenness of relationships between humans and the earth is healed. And again, the Song of Songs is full of many images of fruits and vines and shrubs and trees. It centers itself in this notion of a garden, the notion of new life coming forth into the spring. The Song of Songs and the poems that they share with one another in this book are like revisiting Eden in a way. It's like how it should be. And just taken at face value, the Song of Songs declares that our bodies, our physical sensations, even our sexuality is good. And this long series of poems stands as a light against all of the great harm and shame that unfortunately has been historically heaped upon our heads for being fully dimensional beings. There's always been this undercurrent that seems to say the farther that we divorce ourselves from our physical bodies, the holier we are. None of that is in the Song of Songs. It acknowledges that that too is part of who we are. And again, our desires, the way that our love is expressed to one another, morphs and changes as we transition into the various stages of our life cycle. I mean, most of us here are old enough to think back into our teens or our early 20s, and that, again, that love that person being in our thoughts and in our consciousness all the time, the feeling that this is the one for me and there will never be another. And sometimes that bore itself out, but other times it didn't. It didn't. And again, that's why I say it is up to each person as to how they express that bond to one another. But the Song of Songs, if anything, it would be understood to be a paean or a tribute to young love and desire. And that in itself would be enough. But there is more. Because this book has also been interpreted allegorically. Rather than it being read as just the song of two young lovers, this book has been understood to be a metaphor also for the great love of God that God had for Israel, or by Christians interpreted as an allegory of Christ's love for the church, which is also called Christ's bride. So again, we don't have to look at it allegorically or metaphorically, but we can. And that is one of the beautiful things about the scriptures, is that there is no one face reading of a text, but as we embrace it, as we allow it to enter into us, we see that there are layers that are being revealed that invite us to have a more nuanced and mature view of our faith. And so as we take it in that light, as we take it within the light of it being also an allegory about God's love, Yahweh's love for Israel, or about Christ's love for the church, we come down to one central point in all three interpretations, and that is intimacy. Intimacy. Intimacy with our beloved, intimacy with God, and God's intimacy with us. An intimacy which, like the love between two humans, is naked and unashamed. And I wonder, as we stop and reflect for a moment, many of us may have certain shame that we carry with us around that erotic aspect of who we are, whether it's because of who we love or how we failed to love or what didn't work out or how we think we should be in life at this moment. It's a different kind of acceptance and intimacy that we are talking about in this. Because the one thing that I do want to lift up here is how, unfortunately, some of the tenets of our faith have been distorted to such a degree that we think that abuse is a sign of love. And that is never, never, never the case. Abuse has no place in a relationship that is grounded on love. And if there is abuse, then that is the sign for us to step back and ascertain what is going on here. What do we need to change? What is unhealthy about this? No one is supposed to live in fear or feel diminished because of the intimate relationship that they are in. And that also includes our relationship with God. Our relationship with God should be something that makes us feel safe, that makes us feel stronger than we are, that makes us feel protected rather than diminished. 2 nights ago, I went to see a play. Carolyn is so kind in that she often invites me to go to theatrical productions with her. And so this play that we went to see is at the Next Stop Theater, and it is called An Act of God. And it is a comedy. And it is essentially one long comedic monologue by God with occasional interjections from the archangels Gabriel and Michael, who were sort of his sidekicks. It is a funny play. It is an irreverent play. But it raises some interesting questions. And it spends time, I would say, poking at some of those less than desirable acts of God in the Bible that we struggle to understand. You know, like smiting enemies, raining down fire upon a particular town or city, the inherent cruelty of the Noah story when we realize that everyone who was on that little boat was safe, but all the rest. The story of Abram sacrificing Isaac, as I think about what does that say to children about parental abuse. Many things. The suffering of Job. Why? Why was it necessary? And so this character of God is sort of like wrestling with all of these things. He's in a way riffing on these stories. He's wisecracking about them because he's a character in a play. But he's always a little aloof about the impact on humanity. You know, it's like God is up here, distanced from things, but he never seems to quite enter into or embrace what humanity is going through in this play. And so he makes his way through various, stories in the Bible, and then eventually, even though this is not a Christian play as such, he gets to the part about Jesus. And as he's talking about Jesus, he says, I just couldn't understand him. I always wondered, why couldn't he be just a little bit more macho? Why didn't he want to follow in his daddy's footsteps? Why doesn't he want to exercise his great power like his dad? Why is he letting all of that stuff pass by? And instead of all of that, God says, no, my son chose, rather than embracing all of his power, he wanted to become human. He wanted to feel what you feel. He wanted to enjoy the things that mortals enjoy, to experience human love and laughter, and also loss and sadness. He wanted to take that on rather than claim all of his magnificent power. And of course, we know that in the Gospels there are parallels to do that. I mean, wasn't that the temptation when Jesus was in the wilderness, right? The adversary said, what are you doing out here in the wilderness? You are the source of all things. It's like, call some angels down to heaven and let them feed you, It's like you own all the riches of the world, exercise it. That was his temptation. And so in this play, God is talking about that. But as God watches or reflects on that action of his son, it is very interesting. and again. And I ask you to sort of walk with me on this metaphor or this perspective, even though it may not be expressly scriptural, but it is something that expands our awareness as we engage with the scriptures. As God is watching Jesus in this world, it's as though he begins to understand. It is as though Jesus, being in this world, somehow made that far and aloof and all-powerful God more connected to this world. And then he says, when Jesus allowed himself to be nailed to a cross, to take on the sins and the shortcomings of all, and to bring redemption, in the play, as he reflects on that, everything slows down. It's no more, like a joke every 15 seconds. There is a stillness that falls over the theater in that moment. And then God says this, and I am paraphrasing. As I watched Jesus hanging there, dying and dying and dying for the redemption of others, dying and dying and dying for individuals, dying and dying and dying for the sake of love and compassion, I realized that perhaps he was also redeeming me. God, the all-powerful, the omnipotent, in this play says, I realized that Jesus wasn't just dying on the cross for the redemption of others, but perhaps he was also dying for my redemption. My redemption from being understood as a far off and distant God who punishes more than he praises, who catastrophizes more than he comforts, the God who seems to be waiting in the wings to condemn us lest we fall, lest we be less than God wanted us to be. That the death of Jesus also redeemed that image of God, reframing it. In essence, the God in that play was saying, Jesus died to bring God and humanity close to each other. Close to each other. Jesus died so that we might be in union. The union of loving and being loved. And so each of us here has different experiences with physical intimacy or romantic love. Some of us got married, some of us did not. Some of us wanted to get married, some of us did not. Some of us married the love of our lives, and some of us married someone who was not that person. Some of us realized after a while that we weren't united with the right person. Marriages fail. Often. And some of us were taught to be ashamed of our sexual tendencies, our desire to merge with another because of, again, gender identities or anything like that, and so have never known what it feels like to love someone else without shame. To love someone else feeling that that union is indeed a beautiful and blessed creation of God. And again, when we're talking about healthy relationships, we are never required to endure abuse of any sort, whether it be physical, emotional, or financial, psychological. That is not love. That is not mutuality, and it is not intimacy, although it may be familiar. And familiarity and intimacy are not necessarily the same thing. But we can each have that intimacy with God. We can surrender ourselves in God without fear. without recrimination, without shame. We can seek to embrace and understand more and more and more what it means to be God's beloved and to love others out of that belovedness in God. And I believe and I pray that the more that we understand the intimacy of God and what it means to be loved by God, to be held by God, to be affirmed by God, to believe that when we cry, God cries with us. When we celebrate, God celebrates with us. When we act on the behalf of justice, God is acting with us. When we cry out for mercy, God is involved in that cry and is faithful to answer. The more we understand that intimacy with God and dare to explore it unashamed and unabashedly, the less we will worry about and be defined by the other stuff, who we're married to or who we're not, whether we have a significant other or whether we don't. I'm not just saying that those things are not important, but what I'm saying, beloved, is that no matter what your station in life, whether you have never been partnered, whether you were formerly partnered, whether you are currently partnered, whatever your situation in life is, you are never less than whole, because in God you are whole. And so the challenge and the exercise for us as we walk through this life as people of faith is to begin to understand and embrace that wholeness, and in doing so, be able to release the clinging that we do to others out of desperation. The clinging that we do to others as we desire to make them in our own image or make ourselves in the image that we want. The more we have true healing intimacy with God, the better we will be able to also form true, healthy, and intimate relationships with others, whether they are romantic or otherwise. And so now is the time to seek that intimacy, that assurance, that completion, and that rest. And if you work on this, I know and believe that God will heal your heart, heal the lacking in your life, will send people to you that will help you to celebrate who you are in God. And you will understand what it means to be truly, truly beloved, and what it means to look at others in that way as well. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you that in your word there are so many different approaches, so many different invitations to understanding. And so even though it might make us feel a little uncomfortable sometimes and push our prudish buttons, God, we ask that you would just renew our hearts and our minds and spirits so that we may understand the goodness of intimacy, the goodness of our bodies. May your redeeming work on the cross redeem us, heal us of our shame and our brokenness, so that we may stand as resurrected beings, whole, full, and surrounded in your love. In Christ's name we pray.